I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're diving into the extraordinary life of a leader who dared to challenge the status quo. We're talking with author John W. Weiser, one of my favorite writers, one of my favorite guests, and he's joining us to discuss his powerful book. It is called Grasp the Nettle, Appreciating the Bold Life of Bishop William E. Swing. The book is a compelling look at the defining moments of an influential Episcopal bishop. From social activism to groundbreaking interfaith work, this book explores how the bishop had a fearless leadership style that continues to inspire change today. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us once again here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Bookside Press for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below the interview. And be sure to download the Spotlight Network TV app, streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. John, thanks so much for being our guest once again here today on Spotlight.
My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about Bishop Swing, why he inspired you, why you decided to write about him, and what your connection to him was.
Well, I had been working with a group called the Graduate Theological Union. And an important lady there was Rita Semmel. And when I ran out of time, that is when I finished the allowed time at Graduate Theological Union, I asked her what I should do next. And she said she would set me up for a meeting with Bishop Swing. So I went to meet Bishop Swing, and we had a nice conversation about a new initiative he had underway called United Religions Initiative. And he said he was forming a advisory council and asked me to join, and I did. And I've been working with him now for about 20 years. And some years ago, I was celebrating my 90th birthday, and all my children were coming for the birthday. And Bishop Swing said he would attend. But then at the last moment, when he realized that my children were flying in, they were sitting in airports, and it was the time of COVID.
Yeah.
He asked to be excused because his wife had a serious lung problem, and he could not risk getting in COVID and bringing it home. So I decided my children should know something about Bishop Swing, and I decided to write this book for them. Obviously, then I was glad to share it with other people. He is a remarkable man, and the more I dug into it, the more I admired the things he had done.
Yeah.
So the first episode in my book is a very sad time in San Francisco. It was the AIDS crisis, and San Francisco was the center of that crisis because AIDS patients and gay men from around the United States came to San Francisco because they were ostracized in their hometown. In San Francisco, there was enough of a community that they felt at home. And most of the religious community and better to do people stayed far away from the AIDS people. They did not want to be identified with the gay community. But Bishop Swing saw that there was a problem. And so he made an effort to get to know the AIDS people. And he rented an apartment right in the middle of the Castro district, which was the center of the AIDS of the gay community. And he went there every week to meet with AIDS people and gay people and get to know about them and ask them, when did you first realize that you were gay? What happened when you came out? How did your community react? How did your religious community welcome you? And he realized a great many of these people were refugees from their home community that had come to San Francisco. And so he worked to try to bring them into the mainstream, and he had a large meeting at Grace Cathedral, in which a lot of experts came. They talked about the problem, and one lady there, a doctor, said, "What we know now is that AIDS takes a long time to manifest its existence. And so people are infected for a long time and do not know it. So during that period, there's a risk that they could infect others." And she said there are maybe 20,000 known patients. But she said, my own statistics tell me there are over 1 million people who have this problem. So it's a huge epidemic out of sight. And the bishop worked at this for some time. Of course, more recently, medicines have been discovered that can hold the AIDS problem at bay and people can live normal lives. I have a nephew who is gay and who's told me that he has AIDS, but he leads a perfectly normal life, goes to work every morning, does a good job, supports his mother, but he's a problem. In the old days, he would have been a problem for society, but today it's much better. So that was one of the things where Bill took charge and was not afraid to step into the problem and address it as best he could.
Yeah.
The next big issue was in 1995. In 1995, the United Nations decided to celebrate its 50th anniversary in San Francisco, where the original charter for the UN had been signed. And as they made plans for this 50th anniversary celebration, they called up Bishop Swing, who had Grace Cathedral under his wing, and said, would you invite the leaders of the world's religions to come to the celebration? He said he would, and he did. And they had a wonderful celebration, both on the civil side and on the religious side. But while he was doing this, he was thinking, how is it that the nations of the world have a mechanism for meeting each other and talking about the world's problems, but the religions of the world do not? So he thought, I'm going to try to found a united religions of the world where they can come together and talk and see what they can do to address the world's problems. So he took a sabbatical from being a bishop and he traveled around the world to see all the world's religious leaders. And he met a great many people. And very few of them had any interest in united religion. And as he reflected on it, he realized each one of these leaders has a responsibility to his religion. And he's very busy trying to make his religion more successful. And in those days, very few of them wanted to spend time making friends with other religions. So as he traveled, one of the people he met was a very well-known theologian called Hans Kung. Hans Kung is a German theologian, and he met with Bill, and they spent the better part of a day together talking about Bill's plans. And finally, Kung said, you have to make a very fundamental decision. Is this going to be a meeting of the religious leaders, of the top people in each religion, or is this going to be something done at the grassroots? And as the bishop was traveling around the world, he was talking, he was being interviewed. And what he realized is the religious leaders did not have a great interest in the united religions, but that most of the ordinary people were enthusiastic about finding some way for religions to work together rather than to be in tension. So ultimately, he decided to go the grassroots way. His next question was, how do I do this? He had no experience in this. And fortunately, I think God's hand was in this. He was introduced to a man called D. Hock. D. Hock had been a banker, and his bank had been part of the Bank Americard system, which was the first credit card in existence. And D. Hock went to a meeting of all the banks who were members of the Bank Americard, and he realized that there was something that was not working very well, that there were really some hidden problems. So he went to the leaders of the bank and he said, would you allow me and a group of people to come up with a different plan? So they said, okay. So he went off, and for a few months, he met with some friends, and they devised a system that today we call the Visa card,
Hmm.
which is the world's most successful credit card. And eventually he did that. And when Bill was introduced to him, he asked D. Hock, he said, could you help me put my idea into reality? And Hock was then retired, living south of San Francisco. And Hock said, yes, I'll help you if you would do this from the ground up and not from the top down. And Bishop Swing, who'd been very successful in a top down environment, he was a bishop at the top,
Mhm.
running an organization, and he'd succeeded at that. But as he listened to Hock, he said, okay, I'll agree, we'll try to do it from the bottom up. And D. Hock said, well, that's the way Mother Nature works.
Mhm.
The lowest units make most of the decisions that make the thing run. So he and D. Hock and a small group of people met for many months. In fact, Hock had said to the bishop, he said, this is going to take time. Are you willing to commit time to this? And Bishop Swing said, well, I have a full-time job. And Hock said, well, this is not going to happen by itself. We need you. So Bishop Swing agreed, and they worked for the better part of a year coming up with a basic charter, some basic principles, and then eventually the implementation plan. And Swing said it was very hard because you were trying to put together people with different perspectives. So he said the Christian religions and the Jews and the Muslims believe in God. The Buddhists do not have a God. Yet somehow we had to bring the Buddhists into our tent. And so they worked with broad statements, and eventually they found something that everybody could subscribe to. Then the question is specifically, how is this going to be done? And since Bishop Swing had agreed that it would start at the grassroots, the basic idea was small groups called cooperation circles, a minimum of 7 people. And within those 7, there should be representatives of 3 different belief systems. So he started with the interfaith right away. And they began that. And now we're 25 years later, and there are about 1,200 of these cooperation circles all around the world. A very successful program. We've just lost our executive director, who was a wonderful man, and decided it was time for him to move on. And he's brought another lady in to run it now. But the whole thing has matured very well. So that was Bishop Swing's second thing. And I have about 6 or 8 others I'd be happy to talk about. But I want to
Amazing.
give you a chance to say a word.
Well, I just think what's intriguing about the life of Bishop Swing is that he's not only a man of faith, he's a man of action. That he doesn't just talk the talk, but he walks the walk. And that's what makes him different than a lot of religious figures, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. He's not afraid to reach in and do something.
Yeah.
So he had, for example, uh, after the Rodney King riots, uh, there were terrible riots when Rodney King had been beaten by the Los Angeles police, and then the people who did it were all acquitted. And there were huge riots in San Francisco.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, in Los Angeles. So Bishop Swing convened a number of African Americans in his diocese, and he met with them and said, what can we do? They talked about the situation of the African Americans in American society, and the fact that in those that the banks were redlining districts where Black people lived, and they would not give credit to Black businesses. So as they reflected on it, they came up with the idea of a development bank, a bank which would take money and deposits and then reinvest it in the neighborhood. What he found was before this work, the banks around the country would take deposits from their neighborhood and they would invest those deposits in the neighborhoods that were the most prosperous and that had the least risk for the bank, which meant that the Black people who were making deposits were not getting the benefit of that. And the objective of the development bank was to keep the money in the neighborhood. And so they formed an African Development Bank in San Francisco. It's now in its 10th year or so, very successful. It's a profitable enterprise, and it helps a lot of Black businesses get started. In fact, the fellow who headed the bank said his primary job was education, was to educate the young Black entrepreneurs how to run a business, what they had to do, how to apply for a loan, etc. But it was a very successful enterprise. Another example of the bishop taking something on. Let's see, then there was the homeless episode. Maybe 20 years ago, Dianne Feinstein was mayor of San Francisco. She called up the bishop and she said, look, we have a temporary homeless problem. Can you help? Of course, he said yes. And a day or two later, they were housing homeless people in the basement of Grace Cathedral. But it turned out that these homeless guys were not the best guests. And the people in the neighborhood started complaining. Sometimes their cars were vandalized. Sometimes there were needles or condoms on the streets that their kids had to walk on to go to school. So they complained to the bishop, and he realized he had to do something. And he looked around and he found that the diocese owned a building in another part of the city. So he commandeered the building and he put a lot of the homeless there. And he found that the people who had been running the building had been doing a very poor job. So he threw them out and he put in an old drill sergeant who ran it very strictly and very well. And then lo and behold, a man who owned one of the bathhouses that the gay people used found that his bathhouse was going to be shut down when San Francisco started taking a tougher role. And so he offered the bathhouse to Swing, and Swing took it and he cleaned it up and he used it to house another 5,000 people. And by the time he was finished, he was housing about 15,000 homeless every night.
Amazing.
And when he retired from being a bishop, the diocese built something called the Bishop Swing Community Houses, which house literally thousands of people and feed many more every day. It's another thing that he started and ran on.
Amazing. We have to stop you there, John, unfortunately. It's all in your book. And the folks at home should read more about Bishop Swing. His accomplishments, his faith in action is truly admirable. And you've done a wonderful job documenting his achievements and his Christ-like work here on earth. And I think it's really, really amazing. The name of the book is Grasp the Nettle, Appreciating the Bold Life of Bishop William E. Swing. It is a compelling look at the defining moments of an influential Episcopal bishop. From social activism to groundbreaking interfaith work, this book, as you heard, explores how the bishop's fearless leadership continues to inspire change today. John, thank you so much for joining me here today on Spotlight.
Thank you, Logan. It's a great pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Always great having you on the show, sir. To the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.